Like here, CBI Offroad. Today we're going to be showing you how to install a T2 Bushmaster 2.0 rear bumper. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing the factory bumper. So pretty easy. You have these 17 millimeter head bolts here that we're going to unbolt that are bolted to the frame. And then we have two more right here on the inside on another bracket. You do have to remove these two here before you can remove these two inside ones. The ends of the bolts are just kind of in the way. And then there's going to be a pin that sticks through, so you can remove all the bolts and the bumper's going to stay there. Then you have to lift the bumper and kind of pull it out in order to get it off of there. So again, you can remove all the bolts. You don't have to worry about the bumper falling, and we'll show you how we do that. Alright, so we got our bumper loose. So next, we just got to unplug a couple things. There's, depending on your model, you may or may not have both the connectors. But we got one connector here, and we have another one here. We're going to undo those, and then we can take the bumper and lift it off. And then we can kind of remove these harnesses as we need, like our trailer plug that we're going to take off of there. And then part of our lighting harness that we're going to use on the new bumper. Alright, so once we got our bumper ready to remove, there's a small pin here on each side, so you're going to have to lift the bumper up and then out of this slot here. Otherwise, you're going to have a real tough time trying to pull it off of there. But that's the reason why we can take all the bolts out, is because these pins are here. So we'll get this on the ground, then we'll lift up and then pull out. And you'll probably need a friend to help you out. You could probably do it by yourself as well, but it's just definitely a lot easier with a friend. Alright, so we're getting ready to pull the bumper off. Again, it's got those pins, so we're going to lift up and pull out. It can be a little tricky. It can get kind of wedged if somebody pulls out their side a little bit further than yours. So we'll try and see if we can get this off first try. And there we go. Alright, so now that we got the bumper off, we can go ahead and remove our harnesses. They're pretty simple to remove. You got one main clip here that we really don't need. So I'm just going to cut that guy right there. That guy, and then we're going to be using this existing light harness to tie into our new LED license plate light. But if you don't want to cut your harness, you don't have to. You can kind of build your own, but we're going to reuse this factory harness. So I'm just going to cut it right over here and then cut this clip to pull this off. There, and then this connector we're not going to cut off. We're just gonna leave this one kind of connected, and we'll pull the light out of it, and we'll just tie it up out of the way, because we're just going to be using this one to tie into the new LED license plate light we have provided. Alright, so now that we got our rear bumper off, we got our harnesses off the rear bumper and everything, we can get ready to cut the bedside. So, the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be measuring off the bottom of the tail light down. And so what we're going to be measuring 4.5 inches from the bottom of the tail light down, and then that's where we're going to be making our first mark, is right here. So, we'll make that first mark, and then we're going to come across straight on this side, we'll make another mark there, and then we'll tape it off, and then we'll get ready to cut it. All right, so our next measurement, we're going to be measuring on the front side of this bed right here, and our measurement is going to be off of this small indentation on your fender flare right here. So we're going to be 1 3/8 inches off of this flare indentation, and then we just kind of take and we mark right around the side. If for some reason your vehicle does not have either flares or this indentation on it, what you can do is, once you have your mark here, take something like a nice straight edge, and you can put your mark there, get a level, and level off of your bed. See where the bed's sitting as far as level, and you're going to go off of that. And then you can just kind of match it and go off of that to get a straight line to basically be cutting your bedside with. So those are the two ways. Again, if you don't have the flares, you can just use the straight edge and a level. Otherwise, you're just 1 3/8 inches up to this and mark it, and then we'll tape it off and we'll go ahead and cut it. So we got our marks for our bedside. I went ahead and used my ruler and just made another mark in the middle by just setting my ruler up on these, and I just made a center mark as well, just to help me when I tape this off. But now that we got all of our marks there, we can go ahead and tape this. So we're going to start there, we'll come over. This is one of those things you kind of want to take your time. You definitely don't want to rush marking everything off and then taping it off. When I go to cut this, I'm going to actually cut below this line, and then we're going to sand up to the line so we have a nice clean finish to it. And it also allows for us to go ahead and kind of correct any mistakes while you're cutting it, because if even cutting it right on the line, you know, you may have a little bit of a wave or something in there. So again, we're going to cut below this line, and then we're going to sand up to it to get it just nice and clean. Alright, so now that we got the bedside all taped off, so we can go ahead and cut it. I am using a 5-inch cutoff wheel to do this, and again, I'm cutting below the line here. And so once we get this cut, then we can sand up to our line so we have a nice clean line to go off of. Let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so now that we have our main cut made, we're going to cut back here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to follow kind of along this line. We're going to come straight across and then come straight up on this here. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so got our bedside cut. As you can see, it's still hanging on by the fender liner and this bracket here. So all we're going to do is we have one bolt here, and then the rest are just some plastic clips. We're not going to be reusing them or anything, so we're just going to cut those off of there. And then we'll unbolt that bolt as soon as we get these other ones off and we can get the fender liner out of our way. Alright, so now we can pull the fender liner out of our way. We have this one 10mm here. We can go ahead and unbolt that. And there goes the bottom part of our bedside. Alright, so we got 2 more bolts here that we're going to use to remove this bracket here, but we are going to keep these because we have a bracket that's going to bolt into the side of the bedside here to help keep it stable, because otherwise this thing just kind of moves around, but we have another bracket that's going to bolt into place. So we got to remove these and then keep the hardware. Alright, so now that we have our bedside cut and everything out of the way, you can see I'm cut just below my line. And so now I'm going to take my sanding disc and I'm going to sand up to this line, get it nice, clean, and then I'll pull the tape off and we'll use a flat straight edge, and we'll make sure it's nice and even. We'll kind of, go through and make sure just it's clean, and then we'll continue on from there, adding trim, things like that. Alright, so we got everything cut, cleaned up. So now this edge is a little bit rough. So I just use a deburring tool, but you can also use just a flat file, something like that, that'll clean the edge just as well. But I'm just going to go through and clean up everything, just like that. And then we'll go ahead and put our trim on, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the next side. Alright, so now we got everything cleaned up, our cut. So you're going to get 2 pieces of trim, or 1 piece, you just got to cut it in half, that we're going to put on here. And I'm going to start it just all the way here at the front, bring it back. And so we'll push this on here. Bring it around this corner. Going to have to kind of work it apart. And there we go. Alright, so you really just need to bring the trim to right here, because the bumper's going to come up and it's going to come back. So you're really not going to see any of this in this area. So I just cut it off right there. And then once we get the bumper on, it'll all be hidden behind there. Alright, so now that our trim, everything's all done, before we put the bumper on, we're going to want to put our bed support brackets on. let's keep this thing, because otherwise this is just going to be flailing around. So again, this bolts back into our original bracket here, and then it's going to come to the outside, and then we're going to drill a hole under the flare, and then we got some hardware that's going to go in there. So we'll go ahead and set this up. We're going to put our bolts in to hold it in place first. Just going to kind of get those hand tight, and then we're going to mark this hole here where we're going to drill through, and then we'll pull it back out, we'll drill our hole, and then we can finish mounting it up. Alright, so we got our bracket up here. So again, we're just going to set it kind of in place where we want it. I'm going to put it up just a little bit higher, and then I'm just going to go ahead and mark a good spot off. And then we're going to pull this thing back off, and then we'll drill our hole, and then we can mount it together. Alright, so we got our hole here, we got our bracket back in place. So we can now use, we got a small button head with a washer, and then we have another washer and a serrated flange nut. So we're just going to put those through. So we're just going to leave that a little bit hand tight, and then we'll tighten down our two other bolts on the back side, and then we'll tighten that one down. Alright, so we got our side support bracket in. Bedside is now nice and stiff. It's not going to be flailing around like if we did not put those in. So we can go ahead and repeat all these procedures on the other side. So we're getting ready to put our bumper on. We got everything cut. One of the things we are going to want to watch out for is our side support brackets here are going to have to go around the leafs and the shackles. So you're going to kind of have to finagle it around that. But and then once you get it around that, you lift it up, put it in place. You're probably going to need a friend or two to help you get it up there, get it bolted in place. We have two guys here to help us, so let's go ahead and get this put on. Alright, so we got our bumper up there. It's just being held in place right now by two bolts. So we're going to go ahead and finish putting the rest of the bolts in. They're just hand tight right now. We don't want to tighten them down until we get the bumper, kind of pushed into place where we want it, and then we'll tighten everything down. But these bottom ones you do kind of got to suck up against the frame to get the side ones in first, and then you can kind of loosen them back up. So we're going to go ahead and do that real quick. We'll put these other ones in. Now that that's sucked up, we can look over here and we can actually get to the holes that are lined up here. We'll loosely install those by hand, then we'll loosen those back up. We'll get our bumper pushed in place where we want it, and then we'll tighten everything down. Alright, so now we're going to be mounting our side support brackets to the frame. You're going to have a 1/2-inch bolt and a washer. They're going to go through this hole in the frame here. Then we're going to have a strut washer and a serrated flange nut that are going to go on the back side. We're just going to loosely hand tighten those again because we don't have the bumper completely tight yet. We'll do the other side, and then we can adjust our bumper side to side, everything like that. Make sure it's even where we want it. Then we can tighten everything down. Alright, so we got our bumper kind of adjusted where we want it. And so now we're going to go ahead and finish tightening everything down. Got these 5 on each side. Then you got the 1 side support bracket that you'll tighten down. So we'll go ahead and do that. Alright, so got the bumper on. We're going to go ahead and tie this fender liner back. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it right around that side support. And I'm going to drill just 2 holes here, and then we're just going to zip tie it in place. The other thing you can do is you can just kind of cut, straight across here if you don't want to do that. But this is what we do to help keep stuff from building up in here so much. So go ahead and... There we go, that's nice and secured in place. Alright, so we're getting ready to put our 7-pin back in the bumper. One thing you will notice is this hole is just round, but the back side of our 7-pin kind of has this flat spot in it for the original bracket. We're just going to go and we're going to shave that stuff off of there to make this round, so then we can bolt our bracket back in place. Alright, so we got our stuff all shaved off of here, but we also do have to remove this. Kind of gets in the way back there. But it's just a couple little clips that just come off, just like that. That thing just kind of spreads apart. You can drop it off. So now we can go ahead and see if this thing's going to fit in there, see if we got to shave any more off. But hopefully we should be good. Look at that. It fits right in. So we can now bolt our 2 bolts in place, and we can put that in. Alright, so we're going to install our license plate light. We do send a little bit of hardware with it, a little black screw. You take out these original ones, they're going to be still stuck in it. We just discard those, put these black ones in, and then we're going to put it right through our holes here. The center hole is going to be for the harness to run through, and I've already got some butt connectors on there to wire in for our into our factory harness. We take those, the 2 screws, they're going to slide right in there, and then we're going to put the nuts that we supply with them onto the back side. There we go. Alright, so we got our 7-pin back in place, so we can plug this back in right up here. That one's plugged back in. We'll tie that up out of the way here in a second. And then we have our factory license plate light harness that we're going to plug back in as well. And then this end, we're just going to tape up out of the way because we don't need 2 license plate lights on this. And then this end, I've already got exposed. We got our wires here for our new light. We're going to put those together real quick. Alright, so the factory harness is going to have a white with black and then a green wire here. So white with black is going to go to our white wire here. Green with black, the green is going to go to the black. And we'll go ahead and wire that up real quick. Again, white and black to white, and then the green to black. Alright, and these are a heat shrink style butt connector. So we're going to heat these, and they have a sealant in them. So it seals everything off real well. And we'll go ahead and heat those up. And then that'll be done. And then we'll tie this up out of the way. And the license plate light and everything will be done. And we can move on to the swing arm. Alright, so we're going to tie our harnesses up out of place. These don't need to be anything real specific as to how you're going to tie these up. But I'm just going to bunch this set here around this other factory harness that's held in place. I'm going to zip tie that in. Those are tied out of place. And then this one right here, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to follow this factory harness. Tie that up. Put one right here in the middle as well. Just like that. And we'll cut all these off, and those will be good to go. Alright, so now we're going to start getting our swing arm ready to go on the vehicle. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get this here ready for our bearings that are going to be going in. So we're going to have 2 bearings on the bottom and 1 bearing on the top. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean this surface out. I just use a small wire brush on a drill, helps clean the surface up. And then we're going to coat this with some anti-seize, and then we're going to put the bearings in. Alright, so we got everything cleaned out. We got our anti-seize in there. So we're going to put the bottom 2 bearings in first. So we're going to start these off. And I'm just using a dead blow with a rubber end on it to start these. Get that one in there a little ways, and then you take the second one. Get that in there. It's going to sit just barely below the surface of our spindle here. So now we'll go ahead, put the front one in. This one's going to sit down in further. So we're going to get it started. Once that one's started in, I just use a 1/2-inch socket. And I just press it in the rest of the way. Now, the top does not get a second bearing because there's going to be a seal that comes in here as well to help keep any water, moisture, everything out of there. So that's the reason why there's only a single bearing on the top, and then we have the 2 on the bottom. Alright, so next step after setting up the bearings, we're going to set up our latch. So the latch is pretty simple. It's going to come a little mixed up. You're going to have 2 different style nuts. You're going to have a nylock nut and then just a kind of a skinnier nut there. So the skinnier ones are going to go on to our hook first. We'll send those down. And then we're going to take our pin. We're going to slide that through there. And then we're going to take our nylocks and just put them hand tight on there. And so that's simple enough how you set up the latch. And then we'll bolt this in place and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so our latch is going to bolt right here in place. And so it's going to be bolting this way on our single swing arm. But first, we're going to take our 5/16 bolts. They are a 3/16 Allen to hold them in place. We're going to take some anti-seize. We're just going to put some anti-seize on there. And before we thread these in, just to make sure we don't have any issues with them. And we'll get one started. we'll put the rest of them in there. So, you're going to have a few things that you're going to have. You're going to have your table, you're going to have 2 brackets, and then you're going to have a thing of hardware here. It's going to have quite a few different things in that we're going to go over as we go through the video. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be kind of bolting these down in place, but not very tightly right now. You're going to have some small button heads here with some nylocks that are going to be what we're going to use. So, put these in place on each side. And like I said, we're just putting them in kind of loosely. They don't need to be tightened down right now until we get the table all situated and in place. All right. So once we got our brackets just laid there in place, we're going to take our table, and we have 2 small little plastic white bushings. And each one of these are going to go in the ends of the table with the kind of the 45-degree angle here. So they're just going to push right into there, just like that. We'll take the table, set it back between our brackets, and then we're going to have 2 longer button heads here with nylocks again, and they're going to come through the bottom bracket, and we're going to loosely install those as well. Alright, so with our table just loosely in place here, we're going to go ahead and tighten up these 2 end ones right here first. So those will be the first things that we tighten up on the table setup. Alright, so our next step is going to be installing our little clips that are going to attach the table to the swing arm when it's not in use. So these are pretty simple. We're going to be putting the longer pieces, they're going to be going onto the table, and then we have the smaller ends with the small spacer here that are going to be going onto the swing arm itself. So we'll start getting those set up. Alright, so we have a small little Phillips screw and nut here that are going to be what we attached here. So each side's going to have one. We'll put these in, and these can get pretty much tightened down. They shouldn't move very much. They have a little bit of side-to-side movement, but not a lot. Most of the movement to adjust the table is going to be coming out of the brackets. So, get those tight, we'll install the other side. Alright, so with the table side in place, we're going to go ahead and put the swing arm side in. So, again, same exact screws and nuts that go in this, but these have more movement in them to allow for just adjustability for our swing arm to the table. So these ones we're going to just kind of lightly tighten down. We don't need them very tight right now because we are going to be kind of moving them around. But we want them held in place just enough to where they will stay once we decide where we're going to put them. Alright, so with the latches on the table and our latches on the swing arm, we can go ahead and close this down onto our latches. And that one clipped in. This one's a little bit far over, so we're going to have to adjust them just a little bit on each side and kind of get it squared up. Alright, so with the latches in place and it held, we can now tighten down our brackets here. So we're going to start with these bottom ones here and leave the table closed, so you're just going to have to come up from the bottom and hold the 11 millimeter on the inside, and then just tighten these down. Alright, so kind of the final finessing our latches into place. If they just barely quite don't line up after tightening the table brackets and everything down, just take a small flathead screwdriver, a small hammer, and you can just lightly tap these over, and they'll kind of move either way, either direction you go, and they'll move up and down just a little bit. And then make sure, once you kind of got them in place where you want them, open your table back up, tighten these screws back down just to make sure, and double check it again. And then once you get it all set up and how you like it, should be good. If one side feels tighter than the other, these small balls in here, there's actually a flathead screw on the outside that can actually adjust these and the tightness. So if you see this here, the more you tighten it in, the harder it is for that ball to push back against the spring inside of there. So you can actually tighten these down a lot, or you can loosen them up. Most of the time we just keep it just nice and kind of firm. We don't want it to be too tight. We also don't want it to rattle loose. So that's going to be kind of at your discretion. So next we are going to be setting up our cables that are going to be holding the table in place. So next we're going to be setting up our cables for our table. So you're going to get two pieces of cable just like this. They aren't cut to an exact length, but the measurement that you're going to need for a single swing arm is going to be 16 inches and 15 sixteenths. So we're just going to measure it out here. And again, 16 and 15 sixteenths. So we're going to be right about there. So there's the first one, and we'll measure out the second. And then we'll cut those right on that mark. Alright, so after you have your cables cut to length, we're going to go ahead and strip some of this plastic coating that's on here. So we're just going to take maybe 1 inch to 3/4 of an inch off of here. If you roll around it with the knife and then kind of slice it, and then end up with something like that. We'll do that on each end of each one of these. Alright, so now with all 4 ends stripped, you can put your ends on one of 2 ways. So you can put them just on normal and crimp them on with like a pair of dikes or something like that. But the best way that we have found that holds the best and stays together is we're actually going to solder these into the cables. So we'll show you how we do that. Alright, so we have some regular rosin core solder, and then we just have a MAP gas torch here that we're going to use. So we're going to take the solder and we're going to put this in here first. We're going to heat this up. We're going to kind of fill this about 3/4 of the way full. You're going to have some excess stuff on top. You can just blow that away. And then we can take our cable end. We can heat this back up. Get the solder back into a liquid. Once it is, push that cable end down in all the way. Let that cool down for a second. And as soon as that's cooled off, that's nice and tight in there. And you're gonna repeat that procedure on all 4 ends. Alright, so with our cable ends done, we can go ahead and put them in here. You just have a hole here, then a hole on the table. Go ahead and start these. I'm going to put the button head side on the inside because it's going to be the closest to the table, and I don't want it coming in contact with the table. So we'll put that in there first. Then we'll take the other end. We'll put it on the table side. Once you got those on there, we can go ahead and tighten these down. We don't want to tighten them down all the way. We want them to just be loose enough to where they are able to still move around, because we don't want it stuck in place. So that's why we use the nylocks on those. That's still got enough movement in it. We can move on to the table side and do the same thing. Now we'll go ahead and do this on the other side as well. Alright, so before we get ready to put our swing arm onto the spindle, we're going to want to clean up the spindle here. So you can see ours, we've got a little bit of excess powder coat on the bottom and stuff like that. You know, there may be a little bit excess paint, things like that. So we're just going to take some sandpaper and we're just going to clean this up real quick. Try and get any of the stuff off of there that doesn't need to be there. And then we'll take and we'll put some anti-seize on this and install it. Alright, once the spindle is cleaned up, we can just take anti-seize. We can go ahead and coat this thing. So it'll make it so the bearings go down on this a lot easier. If you don't have any kind of lubricant on there, it's not going to be fun to put the bearings on there. They're quite a tight fit. So anti-seize has worked the best. So that's what we stick with. We'll get a good amount on there. You don't need to worry about having too much, but too little may still make it difficult. So I'm just using a rubber mallet dead blow. So have somebody help you out and lift it up a little bit. the spindle all the way down to the base. And that's about how far it should go in. Alright, so once you got the swing arm on there, you're going to have a seal here. And the seal's going to go right on top, like we talked about earlier, why the reason we only have one bearing in the top. The seal fits right around there. Then it should push in. Just a little bit of force. Get that just sitting right around that edge. And then we can put our spindle cap on. Alright, so our next step, we're going to be putting our spindle cap on. But one of the things that we're going to want to do first is the inside of the spindle cap. If you have a tough time fitting this over the spindle, it's probably because of an excess amount of powder coat or paint in there. So we're just going to take our tool here and we're just going to sand it out, get rid of all the excess, and then we'll put it on. Now that's nice and cleaned out, we're going to put some anti-seize in there, help prevent it from rusting, and then we'll put the spindle cap on. Alright, so with our spindle cap ready, slides right on there. We're going to have 2 of our button head Allens. They're going to fit right in here into the 2 captured nuts that are going to be on the inside of the bumper already. Alright, so once we got those started, we can take our Allen, we can go ahead and tighten these down. Once these 2 Allens are tight, you can go ahead and tighten your locking Allen on the top of the spindle cap. Once your spindle is all in place, we can go ahead and put our pull pin in our spindle cap. We just thread that in there. And then go ahead and just tighten it down just a little bit with pliers. And it's set in place and should line up with your hole when the swing arm opens. Alright, so next we're going to be installing our bump stop for our swing arm, which goes right here on the bumper. It's going to be a 3/16 Allen head. And it may be kind of a tight fit to hold this bump stop in place perfectly. Once it's tightened down, it's nice in place, it's not going to go anywhere. And our swing arm has something to kind of ramp up onto, especially when you have a lot of weight on the swing arm, and a nice place to rest. Alright, so next we're going to be putting our catch on for our latch system. So it's kind of got this longer end here. That's going to go towards the front of the vehicle. And then we'll have a serrated flange nut for the inside. We'll put that in. And we can go ahead and tighten this down. Alright, so next we're going to be tightening down our hook here. So this one is going to be kind of tightened down just barely all the way to the end. So we're going to take this and take our 2 nylocks on the end here. And we're just going to tighten them down just to where the nylock, the end of the threaded end kind of protrudes through the nylock. Just like that. Do that on both of them. And we can latch this again. If that's not quite tight enough, you can go ahead, tighten it up just a little bit more. Make sure you do an equal amount on each one. Check it again. That's good right there. Now we can take these, and these are just our locking nuts to hold this in place properly. So once you get those put up to the end, loosen that, and then lock these into place. Once those are all locked into place, that should latch nice and tight. First thing is, we have something similar to this, whether you have an angled or a straight. So this is going to be a straight tire carrier. Some of your hardware here, you're going to have 3 12 by 1.5 bolts that are going to act as your studs, and you have some washers here that are meant to catch the stud in place, which they'll just slide right over. So as you can see on the face of this, we have 5 different holes. Now the difference here is going to be for the multiple different vehicles and applications that we make swing arms for. If you have a Toyota Tacoma or a 4Runner, you are going to be using obviously this bottom hole and these 2 lower holes here. If you have a Colorado swing arm, you will be using these same ones here. If you have like a Tundra or a Lexus 5-lug, any of that stuff, that's what these 2 top ones and the lower one are going to be for. So again, make sure you got the right bolts in the right holes so your bolt pattern matches up. So we can put our other 2 in place. Again, these just slide right over. They can be a little bit difficult. If you have a deep socket, you can push them on with a deep socket. But for the most part, they should go on fairly easily. So that's set up. You have your lug nuts here. If you're using a factory wheel, you will need a factory shank style lug nut. But this one, we will be using the aftermarkets. All right, so now we're going to be installing our first part onto the swing arm. So our swing arm right here has these holes that are meant for our tire carrier, and so they're adjustable. So depending on the size of the tire, where you want the tire sitting, and whether or not you have, whether it be an angled tire mount or a vertical tire mount, is really going to depend on where these are going to go. This vehicle only has about a 33-inch tall tire, and this is a vertical tire mount. So we're going to put these in our second holes down. We have a serrated flange nut for the back side. So once we get 2 of these started in place, we can grab the other 2, put them in our bottom holes. Once you have all these in here, we can go ahead and tighten these down. All right, so these are a 5/8 bolt head. So you have 5/8 here. We're just going to tighten these down. You got a serrated flange nut on the inside. So that should stay in place. Get those nice and tight. And then we can install the upper half of our tire carrier. All right, so the upper half we can go ahead and install now. This part has the slots in it for adjustability, for the difference of tire size, offset, things like that. So we're going to put 2 of our bolts in there and set this on top. And then we're going to loosely install the nuts on the inside, because we're still going to put a tire on here, and then once we got the tire on, we can set this thing in place for which spot and adjustment we need it at, and then we can tighten everything down. Alright, so getting ready to put the spare tire on there. I did just slightly tighten these up by hand just so this stays at the full out position so that I can put the tire on there, bolt it on, and then I can loosen those up and slide the tire in where I need it. Now, if you have any issues with these not being able to tighten down, you may have to hold the inside head of the bolt, which is a 19 millimeter. You may have to hold that to tighten it down fully. Most of the time they catch and they'll pull in, and they should work pretty easily. Alright, so tire's on. We pushed it back into the swing arm, so it's sitting up against the swing arm. We don't want it out away from the swing arm too far or anything, because it can really start to shake when it's out further away. But now that we have it in place where we want it, we can go ahead and we can start tightening these down. And once we have these all tight, if you ever need to pull your tire on or off, you can just leave it in place, and everything should be exactly the same each time you go to use it. So, this is the high lift mount right here. Very simple installation. You're going to have just 4 bolts. They're going to be a button head. So we're going to go ahead and put in there. Then we have 2 more go in right here on the side. So we're going to have a serrated flange nut that's going to go on the back side of each one of these. Once you have those installed, you can tighten those down, and then we'll show you how you mount a high lift on here. Alright, so now we'll show you how you mount your high lift into our mounting spot. So, high lift's going to go on just like that, and depending on your tire setup, is going to depend on how far over and stuff you put it. Your hardware here, you're going to have some carriage bolts, and they're going to go right through the square holes that we have cut out in this for them. You're going to put a washer, and then your nut here. You can kind of tighten that down. And then you have a slotted one here for adjustability, and we're going to put that one on. Then we're going to put our arm here to help keep the arm of the high lift from rattling around and things. And then we tighten this down. Now you are going to want to tighten these with like a pair of channel locks or something to get this really tight on there, because we don't want it rattling around, moving a lot. This helps a lot with noise reduction of this arm here rattling and making noise. But once you got it on there, tighten those down with a pair of channel locks or something similar, and you're good to go, and your high lift is now mounted in place. Alright, so for our bottom high lift mount, it's going to go right down here. And it's going to bolt right in place. One thing you are going to want to do, you are going to have to put your hardware through the back first before you mount it up. But once you mount it up, it's going to have the same hardware as the top high lift mount. You'll tighten it down in place, and then you'll mount your high lift exactly the same as the top one. Alright, so that takes care of our T2 high clearance Bushmaster rear bumper install. If you guys have any questions or concerns, give us a call or email us here at CBI Offroad. Thanks.